My name is Stan Baines, and I am your chair of this session and a steering committee member of the Canadian Network for Imagination and Creativity, or CNIC for short. My fellow imaginative adventurers in our steering committee with us this evening are scattered about on your screen. So, steering committee members, if you could give us a wave so that everybody knows who you are. Perfect. Each month, we are excited to come back to this place and share with you our different topics from our hosts and guests from time to time, and then to the discussions that can happen with you afterwards. CNIC's goal is to create and foster open thinking dialogue as we look to find new innovative ideas, look at things from different angles, see creativity and imagination from different backgrounds and perspectives, ask questions, and explore. It is our hope to expand our minds in new directions, collaborate through idea sharing, create partnerships in our differences, in our sameness, and in our beliefs. Let us find creativity through the exploration of our imagination and ideas. As a resident of Clarence, Rockland, Ontario, which sits just outside of the east end of the city of Ottawa in Ontario, Canada, I would like to acknowledge at this time that I'm chairing our meeting on traditional unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory and people. On our road to reconciliation, we may stumble on fears, worries, and memories of yesterday. Let us together hold each other up so that the dreams of tomorrow wipe away the clouds of yesterday. This is a space to learn, explore, and share. We want you to do that in your way to make this space your own. Not only do we want to hear your ideas and thoughts, but listening is equally as important. Reflect and participate in your way. Our format is simple. Once our hosts guide our discussions for the evening, we'll open the floor up for discussions and chats and begin to see where our journey will lead us through our time together. As you can clearly see, and as we're all becoming very familiar with over the last handful of years, Zoom is our platform of choice for this discussion. So Zoom allows you to participate in many different ways. It has built-in controls that allow you to raise your hand so we can see you when you wish to join in the conversation. And as mentioned before, you can add things to our chat function as well, which will help keep the ideas flowing if you don't want to say something right in the immediate moment. Share your ideas your way and join in our jam. So thank you as always, my friends, for letting me speak. You've been so kind and patient. So now we're going to get down to the fun part of the night before I burn out Jessica's phone. So our guided discussions tonight will be led by Gillian, Judson, and Jessica Sokolowski. We're going to be talking about creativity in a world of smartphones and AI. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to you, Gillian and Jessica.
Thank you so much, Stan. And 3 cheers for Stan and his awesome hosting voice. Love that. So where did this idea come from? I wanted to quickly introduce that. When we were planning for this year's set of idea jams, I reached out to Jessica to see if she wanted to collaborate. Teamwork makes the dream work. And sure enough, it's been great fun. We met at the end of August last year, and this kind of matters, the timing of this, because I just spent a few weeks on holiday with my family. And during that time, I remember watching my 16-year-old on her phone a lot. When we were on planes, when we were on trains, when we were chilling in waiting rooms, when we were waiting to do things, she was using her phone a lot, specifically phone-based apps that allowed her to communicate in fun ways, I would say, with her friends. Social media for my 16-year-old daughter is 100% what she's interested in. And I recalled on earlier family holidays when we would pull out the books and the coloring and the small sewing kits and the little pocket charade games. And then I also started to think that at home, our activity room lies empty. Nobody goes in it anymore. We've got the dried up paints in there. We've got all these things that used to be part of her creative outlets. Even a slime factory we had going at one point in that room. But it's not used for that anymore. And so I was thinking to myself when I met Jessica, like, where is the creativity here? What is creative? And my daughter pointed out to me, she said she was doing digital collage with some of the images at one point. And they were dancing and doing creative acts with TikTok. She was filming and editing little bits on the trip. But I wasn't really convinced. And I shared this with Jessica, and then she shared a little bit about her own kids.
So thank you so much, Gillian. One of the things that Gillian and I were bonding about is definitely the differences between our perceptions of creativity and those of our children. So I'll give you a little backstory with my children and the conversation that we had. My children have really grown to like a lot of video games. And typically, when my children were younger, we did spend a lot of time outside in the great outdoors. We did a lot of swimming and a lot of art that gave them an opportunity to explore creativity in those types of ways. Now, one of the things that I noticed with their video games was the extended amount of screen time, which obviously concerned me. So, as Jillian and I were discussing, I spoke with my daughter about the issue that I was having with the technology use and all of video games. They showed me the video games, and as it turns out, video games are incredibly creative. Video games aren't necessarily the way that I remember video games from when I was a child or I was a student. And some of these video games are super excellent. An example that comes to mind right away is Minecraft. It is something actually that we utilize in the elementary classroom. And they have various other games that allow them to take on different personalities, build villages, et cetera, et cetera. So when Julie and I were talking about what this session could look like, one of the key questions that we wanted to pose to you, and this is where we'll start, is what does creativity look like through the ages? So when we consider when people are 3, 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, how does creativity change and develop with age? Not just our own personal age now in the moment that we're living, but possibly through the ages altogether in terms of the decades that we've been going through. So this is our first question that we want to pose to the group. So Stan, I'm not sure if you're able to navigate the conversation with people that might be putting up their hands to join us in conversation about creativity through the ages.
John, go ahead.
So I have a son who's an independent game developer. And when he started to develop video games in sort of high school, and when he went to college, he went to Algonquin for a period of time, I realized that video game development is the new liberal arts. He needed a tutor to learn math, and I got him a tutor. But when he started developing a video game in a high school, he realized that he had to spawn, get a cannonball to come out of the cannon and go through an art. And all of a sudden, oh, this is the math I've been learning. And that taught me that if we taught reading the way we teach math, none of us would know how to read. Our examples would be find a noun, find a verb, create a sentence, not tell a story. So video game development requires physics, mathematics. It requires psychology because you need the interface. What makes an interface work? You need music, you need narrative. Pretty much all of the sciences and arts are involved in the creation of a modern video game. I have a daughter who's on the autism spectrum. And now she's on the phone all the time, but she's contacting her friends. Now, my autistic daughter's 30 years old. She doesn't go out to a bar. She doesn't go out to socialize, right? Seeing her, she has actually taught me how to use my phone better. When you take a picture, you can use Google Lens to find out what that picture is. She taught me that. So this takes me back to two things. There was a transformation of painting that occurred in around the 1850s. Before 1850, a painter had to get up in the morning and mix their pigments. So they didn't mix a lot of pigments because, you have to use it before they dry out. After 1850 thereabouts, all of a sudden, the tube came along and they were putting paints in tubes. Now a painter could go out in nature with 24 colors, changed how painting was done, right? So and then again, the photo, the camera. Oh my goodness, it's going to destroy art. Well, now the photography is an art form. So I think it's really important to distinguish from creativity from the methods and technologies with which we use to be creative. Scientists and artists are always on the cutting edge of tinkering with new technology, new methods. So that's sort of my experience.
Thanks, John. Fred.
Well, thank you. I won't start on the math part. We'll do that another time. But a few quick anecdotes. I remember when my 42-year-old was in her teenage years, she spent all her time talking on the phone and messaging her friends on the computer. And I kept trying to drive her to get more job skills, etc. Well, her first job was a call taker for a dispatch company, talking on the phone and typing on her computer. I didn't visualize what the future was going to be. I held, as a teenager myself, I held my first computer in my hand and it had 5K of memory. And I said, I'll never type a program that large. Well, I can't type a letter to somebody that small anymore. And so when we look back over the years, we are challenged constantly that we don't know enough yet because everything's changing. Matter of fact, I was in a grade 3-4 classroom, and I'd finally got one kid who's on the spectrum to do some work, and he was actually coloring a dinosaur. But at one point I came by him and he's coloring his marker. And I went, Daniel, what are you doing? Well, it's not the right color of gray. And so here he is changing the marker. And I'm going, I didn't consider that before. So I'm finding, as BC is challenging whether or not we allow cell phones into the classroom, being spurred on to try to think with new eyes in this whole area. So the topic is quite interesting. I'll pass it over to others.
Gerard.
Well, so when I was 16, many moons ago, I picked up my first camera, and that had a huge impact on my life. And today I actually use a lot of the camera technology in this phone. And I have to admit that it really didn't change how I see photographically, and there is a difference. And I've been doing this, I've been around this for 40 some years now. So the technology itself, at least within the context of photography, and yes, it doing digital photography, you can access text and everything else, and even create short videos with it as well. So but it really didn't change how I see. And what's also interesting to find out is that there are a lot of people that are younger generation, and I would say in their 20s, now going back looking for film cameras and actually, picking up, buying bulk film. And there's only a few places you can get that now. So there's this book called The Revenge of Analog, and it talks about some of that. Some people are moving away from this technology. So it's interesting. I think there's almost a conflict that's happening in some ways. And at the same time, yes, I have a great nephew. I see he may, we're not sure, but he may be on the spectrum. He's on the screen all the time. And I know that there's already studies happening right now around screen time and its impact on young brains and their development. But that, not to sound like some kind of Luddite, but that's one of the I think, issues that we have to consider as well as we're using this technology. And I know it's being used all the time now in the school system. I don't work in the school system as an educator. I'm in the community, so I don't see a lot of the I don't work with kids, in that way. So but I just want to point that out, that there's that a kind of an interesting thing happening too. At the same time that there's all the screen time happening, there's also some of these kids that are moving away from it as well. So and I'm not sure, if that's an influence from within the home or other influences. So just
If
throw
I,
that out there.
Gerard, if I could just jump on what you've said and what Fred has said, and what I think John started out with, is that these technologies can certainly expand what we think is possible for ourselves. And just for myself, I've been really inspired by Lynn's work. Lynn Fells, we know her and love her. She's in the room today. Her performative inquiry, the notion of performing our understanding and performing our learning through arts-based methods. It's been something I've been exploring as I expand my understanding of research and practice. And I've recently really gone deep into using collage as a form of inquiry and as research. And for me, the digital forms of collage are completely feeding my love of metaphor and imagery and all of these things. So I'm beginning to be critical of my initial skepticism and judgment of my daughter's choices, if that makes any sense, because I'm suddenly being opened up. And I'm not saying for a second that there's not a difference between physical collage, cutting, pasting, gluing, placing, and the digital form. And I'm also exploring outdoor nature-based assemblages of materials, which Susanna could speak to because she does a lot of art-based work in place. But I'm just saying that it's exciting because we're led into a space where we obviously didn't know existed ahead of time. Thanks for letting me liaise in there, and Kathy's up next, I think.
I was just thinking back to starting to teach computers with computers in 1982 when they were brought into classrooms in Ontario, and going and asking the other teachers, are you using that box in the corner? And they go, no, I wish it would go away. I don't want to have to learn about another thing. And so I scooped them up and I linked them all up and started publishing my students' poems on, Gestetners, and dot matrix printers. And so since that time, and setting it up in different schools and teaching in universities in different provinces, the United States, and always setting up computer labs. And I remember, though, years later, after when I started in '82, the students who had the problems with focusing and getting their homework done and all the subjects that I was teaching, they were on Game Boy all the time. And so I remember meeting with parents and them saying, well, we'll have to restrict their time on Game Boy because they weren't actually getting any homework done because that was their whole focus. Well, fast forward and through numerous years, and as a photographer and videographer, and I'm on the computer all the time, but is that good for you? I remember reading about schools in Ontario that decided, they're going all computer-based in Southern Ontario, this particular school. And when they let the children out to play, they didn't know how to play, because they lack that face-to-face and they lack that creativity. And so if you're always on a screen and you're always, that's your modus operandum, that's the way that you're talking to people, that changes the way in which you react to people. Now, oftentimes when you go places, instead of it being noisy, everybody has their earplugs on and everybody is, texting each other and talking to each other. Well, physiotherapists and chiropractors are just going, hey, here's the future generation. I'm going to keep working all the time, because there's tons of tendonitis, you get to the point, well, can you even move that index finger? There's all those sort of physical problems that come about with being too long on a computer. So things change through time, and I think physically that's tougher to do as you get older, just the amount of sitting and the focus in that regard. So how does that affect one's creativity? Well, it opens you up to a whole other bunch of things that you could possibly do with all these software programs. And I've been teaching tons of software programs, throughout my career. So it's great to turn people on to the technology and to using all of these devices. And I remember my students saying to me as I was teaching them all these software programs at this last university I was teaching at, and saying, geez, Dr. Browning, you're teaching us all these software programs, but you don't have a cell phone? I said, no, because I can't keep up with email. I mean, I was one of the professors who was always getting back to all my students all the time because I felt that that was a necessary thing to do, to offer them support and answer whatever questions that they wanted. But that time on task, that also does something psychologically to you as well, with the need of instant response, feeling that you have to do that. And as I was driving home from work one day, I remember hearing a report on the radio about how blood pressure is rising and there's more heart attacks from people being too much the feeling of time on task. Always being on their cell phones. So while there's all this great stuff that is happening because of technology and all these other great programs, and John mentioned some stuff too about what his son was able to do with that, and it opens up a whole pile of different types of jobs, and gaming and creating all of these programs and software programs and stuff opens up all these different types of jobs for new and young people. There's also the other side to everything. So I thought that I'd just throw that in there because I've seen both of them.
Well, I want to thank you, Kathy, for not using that computer in the 80s as a paperweight. So yay for you for not doing that. I completely hear you about the physical effects of this. I wonder about the social norms and changes coming from technology, because I called a friend the other day and my daughter looked at me and she's like, that's really aggressive. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, well, you don't just phone. You never just phone someone. That's super aggressive. And I'm like, okay, so that's new. But you said so many things are super provocative, Kathy. The other piece was just like this neoliberal emphasis on progress and working and more progress. I can actually answer emails when I'm out for a walk now. Yay. So it's definitely changing societal practices. I think this is a good point now to just transition into our next question. And some of us might be already there. But the topic we chose today, Jessica and I chose today, came out of my kind of judgment. I was really judgy about what my girls were doing. Outside of my parental concern about what social media is doing to my child's self-esteem, et cetera, I was evaluating how creative she could possibly be with her apps and her phone. I acknowledge some of this comes from my ignorance in terms of what those apps do and what they require. And so I have my own thoughts and wonderings, for example, about AI and about my role in teaching and AI being a force for evil or good or both. And so we wondered, and this is the question we'd like to put to the group now, is there a form of creativity that you resist a little bit? Maybe not massively, but is there something that you might resist? And if so, why?
Gillian, thank you so much for that segue. I'm hoping that maybe I could share first to kind of get the ball rolling. Two things were coming to mind. Kathy, I loved your response. The whole time I was thinking about my own sort of reservations. A long time ago when I was in teachers college, the smart boards were just becoming a thing. And I couldn't fathom how having a giant screen in the classroom could be conducive to learning and creativity. And I truthfully couldn't have been more wrong about the capability. I'll share with you that I did have a few years that I taught solely online, and I've learned so many ways that we can be instrumental in using technology to not just teach our students literacy, creativity, but also allow them to have self-expression. And building on Kathy's point, I love to do stop motion animation with students. So when we think about technology, I've also had to get myself out of the mindset that you're just sitting stationary at a computer. We now have the opportunity to have apps on our phones, tablets, etc., that we can be using apps like stop motion and moving around the room and getting excited and having that inquiry and being able to create, structures with Play-Doh or any kind of soft molding dough and create storylines. So I'm wondering if anyone has an experience like myself, or maybe you did have an adverse reaction initially, whether out of bias or not a full understanding of the capability. And then after coming to learn a little bit more about it, you softened and realized, oh my goodness, this is actually really awesome. And I'm really happy that I have access to this.
Sharon, go ahead.
I just wanted to react to the term screen time. When I studied Waldorf education, that was the television that children didn't watch when they were young. And I also want to say, for myself, an artist, I am putting a lot of my time on screens instead of on the painting. That's all. And I teach virtually now, whereas I taught in the classroom before, art.
Would you be able to tell, I'm fascinated, I'm so sorry to interject. Could you tell us a little bit more about your with art on more about that?
You're breaking up. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Could you type it in the chat? Your bandwidth is
Yes,
low.
I'm sorry. I hope that my connection. Sorry?
Your bandwidth is low. Can you type it in the chat so I can understand your question?
Yes.
For all the time we've been using Zoom, you'd figure it would have gotten better over time, but it never does.
Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me? I've switched devices. I'm hoping this is a better connection.
It is a better connection. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'll explain art online. My husband gave me the gift of going to see the Impressionists in 3D. And I thought it was so wonderful. I suggested to my students that they do the same thing. Consequently, we have been looking at the artists in that CD, in that film that we all saw in 3D, and exploring their life and their ways of expression, their creativity, their uniqueness, and taking whatever we want from that to use creativity ourselves. So if we study Van Gogh, I'm inspired Van Gogh, and I do a painting with his uniqueness, but with my interpretation of it. Same with Gauguin and all the other artists that we've been studying.
I love it. Thank you. That sounds beautiful.
I'm loving it too. I'm learning a lot. And I'm reading books on the biographies, which I never did before. I've got a lot of catalogs, but the books on the biographies are giving me a whole other context for where they came from and their life.
I think I saw Goran's hand up too in there. Thank you so much, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all for such insightful and thought-provoking and wonderful comments. I really do appreciate this this sort of balance and this kind of dialectic that we hear in these various sort of beautiful views around sort of exploring technology as a medium for expression, and sort of thinking of it as a medium, treating it as a medium for creativity, and its full potentialities for being able to do a variety of things that perhaps we weren't able to do at some point or another. I love the example with the tube in the paint, or the paint in the tube, which I wasn't aware of, and then correlating that and balancing that against this whole embodied experience that we have as human beings as well. That's so important. Several years ago, I believe it was a World Creativity and Innovation Week event at OCAD. I participated in a very interesting session where someone was showing what to me at the time seemed as unusual exercises, and they had to do with using something on either side of your body, usually say a left hand and right hand, or right knee and a left elbow, but something across the body to then do an interesting movement. For example, touching the left knee with your right elbow while sitting. And the notion was that this actually improves creativity in the body because it connects across the hemispheres in the brain through the corpus callosum, and it helps the body develop sort of more so than motor skills, an enhanced sense of connectivity through the brain. And in speaking with the presenter afterwards, I realized that this was a growing body of awareness, that our movement and our embodied experience actually has a lot to do with various skills that we have that are not just motor, but also creative skills. So it seems to me that this balance between, exploring technology as a medium full of opportunity for exploring the talents of our students and our colleagues and ourselves, while somehow balancing with this kind of human aspect of embodiedness and sort of not all kind of getting, the thumb that requires going to the chiropractor, is an interesting question. How might we be able to do that in the future?
That's great.
Sharon, go ahead.
I'm thinking about the reality of having had the pandemic and switching to virtual exercise class 5 times a week, which I still continue, and the mind-body connection. If you're working your body, then your mind and your brain are all being affected. And I believe it's helped my creativity.
May I move on to sort of the next little session that we have for you? I do see that we have only about 20 minutes left, and I'm wondering, what was the whoa factor for you? What is something that you've discovered through either accident or purposeful by engaging with different types of technology? What is something for you that has left you like, wow, I am so happy that I've been introduced to this, or this is a takeaway that I can definitely find myself using? What was something that surprised you in terms of expanding your frames of mind around creativity?
Sharon, go ahead.
Just teaching virtually. I was asked to fill a grant during the pandemic with seniors. And so I had to think about how to get the creativity with motivation, with inspiration, with their getting excited. And it was a whole other way of thinking than walking around the classroom and encouraging or having a motivation that I set up and do. So the fact that I could use this and not have to drive and clean the classroom afterwards was quite lovely.
Fred.
Wows tended to come when things got blended. For example, in a math class, when we were using graphing calculators, we would take the different functions we were using, and they would have to draw a picture. And when the artists got an opportunity to do this, I could do the mathematics of what they were doing, but I couldn't have made those 18 equations produce that perfect rows. And then another happened when I would flick through a series of student photos of their project from the previous year. And 2 of the kids looked at it and went, I can animate. And so they produced animations instead of static images. And I wasn't expecting that. And then, well, there's so many, I'll let it go to other people too. But definitely when we blend different genre together and different skill sets, I remember that girl with the rose. I met her 9 years later, and we had a conversation in the parking lot, and I had to explain to her with great sorrow, someone had broken into the classroom and stolen my computer and all the calculators, so her picture was gone. And she just teared up and said, "You remember my rose?" I said, "Yes, I do." And her marks changed completely because all of a sudden the technology, she was seeing the math working for her to do something in her passion set. And that made all the difference.
Kathy.
Something that I found through time and teaching technology is I always put creativity first and the technology second. So if I'm teaching a new software program, for example, it gets really boring just to teach the technology. So I would just teach enough and then get everyone to work on the assignment. Everything is open-ended. Everything is open for interpretation. And basically, you're not going to be able to teach them all that there is to know in any one software program anyway. So just start them off enough that they can get started on the assignment. And while they're pecking around, they're actually finding out how to use the technology because they're creatively interacting with it and trying to complete that particular assignment. So I always put the C first before the T. And to me, that was a great way to be able to teach the technology. So, and my students appreciated that because when they look at all the work that was completed in the class, every assignment was individualized for that particular student. And when we put them all up and took a look at it, they just were all like, wow, you know, because there's all these different ways of interpreting it. And there's all different levels of students being able to figure out that particular piece of software. And that's all fine. And that's all good. And everybody's sharing other things and people are running around and helping each other. And it was really cool, actually, when I was in Newfoundland once and I went and saw a classroom. And there I was in a grade 2 class. And there's different students who were learning how to use the software program. And they were running around helping the other students. I thought, this is amazing. This is so cool. Grade 2, you know, so what they were learning at that level for that particular piece of software. And that's something that I always remember. And I always encourage my students to do, to share with others. So just throwing it out there.
Kathy, I love your comment about the collaboration. As you were speaking, I was wondering if anybody might have any examples outside of technology. What came to mind was Gillian's example of doing the collage, just as an example. And just those pockets, those aha moments. This sounds so simple, but just watching my son will tape and retape his hockey stick 3,000 times. And at first I was thinking, you're just wasting hockey tape. Like, why are you doing this? And I recognized the creativity in it and the different expression that he was having with the flavor of the week of how he was feeling. He would decorate the stick. So I'm curious how we might on creativity. So I might not things outside of my realm of creative practice. I'm also curious how we can tie, for example, the collaboration. Maybe technology, maybe not. The whoa moments, new things that we're constantly learning. So I'm curious if anybody has any comments in terms of ways that they've experienced things you normally wouldn't expect outside of the use of technology.
You're cutting out a wee bit, Jessica, but I definitely think what you're asking for is, you know, outside of tech, how are we moving outside of what we typically do? And I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but in the realm of ecological thinking and research, there's a real interest now. It's been ongoing, but if we put the language of current research on it, is how do we decenter the human in research? How do we do research with the natural world, not just about the natural world? So those kinds of questions, for me personally, are really pushing me outside of what I think research is. I could not possibly imagine, that doesn't make sense. I couldn't possibly do the work I want to do to decenter the human in these questions, to incorporate the voice of the more than human world, if I didn't imagine alternatives. And so this is where I'm really learning from my colleagues like Susanna, who's in the room, who uses her art practices within the natural world, within place, to see if she can evoke meaning and represent the natural world in ultra-linguistic ways, in ways outside of this dominant textual way of doing things. I don't have any answers to it. I just know that if we want to call this sort of decolonizing the way I think about research, it is definitely not using technology all the time, but I'm not opposed to using technology some of the time if I try to use collage, for example, to make sense of new questions that are emerging in my research. But anyway, sometimes my point is sometimes we are faced with scenarios where the norm doesn't offer us anything. It's literally the problem we're trying to overcome.
I just want to say thank you, Gillian, for bringing that up. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you were talking about ways of doing things outside of using words and outside of just using certain parts of our mind. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, but it's hard to put into words because we're limited with words. And so, yeah, I don't know, I keep coming back to how do I express things, visually in ways that are embodied, in ways that are more felt and sensed, in ways that words don't, they don't seem to do things justice. Like I'm just struggling right now, trying to write an article and I have trouble thinking in linear ways because I think in images and so do I go this way, do I go that way? And it's like all over the place. And which way do I emphasize? So this is not really connected to technology, but I just wanted to kind of express appreciation for what you said in terms of finding new ways and our logocentric ways of being and of educating are limiting. They're very limiting.
And I put into the chat, Susanna, the blog you wrote for ImagineEd and just the title. So how do we imagine our way into the lives of other beings in our ecosystems? Like, whoa. And I think our technology there is we need to use our bodies and the artistic means we've maybe underused in research to investigate these. I have a kabillion more questions and answers, so it's kind of exciting.
Oh, God. I wonder if I could jump in. I hear this often that words are limited and that other ways of arts can express I'm going to just say on behalf of those of us who breathe words, whose that words are like, they're like paint, they're like light, they're like breath. And that each one of us has a different medium with which calls us to engage, and with curiosity, with wondering, with not knowing how to engage. But I just think of, poetic writing, reflective writing, performative writing, writing with image, writing with all the spaces in between. And so, and I do love this idea of writing with the environment. I guess the one thing I always listen to is, do we talk about art as using art, or using words, or using music too, which is instrumentalist and pragmatic and doesn't speak to or recognize what art or words or music can evoke, provoke, invite in the medium and practice and how it arrives in our lives. I remember when we bought an electric keyboard and we're all excited because we could tie it up with our computer. And, after about 20 minutes, we realized, well, we're not musicians and we really are struggling here with chopsticks and things. So there is a kind of apprenticeship and a way of living and coming into an authorship and authenticity with the work that each one of you do that I admire so greatly. There we go.
Goran.
Wow, what amazing comments and such a great invitation. As a question, as a yes, and I wanted to add to that indeed this kind of non-anthropocentric view that we're attempting to evolve seems to be so critical, because as we are sort of attempting to become, the custodians of the biosphere as opposed to, just an extractive kind of version of humanity, it would seem that evolving this view is if not very helpful, then perhaps even essential. And how might we get there is an interesting question. I mean, the previous comment, the brilliant comment, I think was so valuable in a sense that in many ways, but it certainly what stuck with me was this notion of the multimodal nature of creativity and imagination, that there are many different modalities. There seems to be something about us as perceiving beings or as creative beings, as imaginative beings, that is able to engage with this multimodality in ways that seem natural to us, and then to kind of connect them with others. I feel that in a lot of your work that is so inspirational, all of you on this call and more broadly, I wonder whether the moment when we engage others is that moment of reflexivity, that moment of sort of something happening, whether it's an event or an invitation into a learning experience, a painting, a writing invitation, or something like that, where we pause for a moment and we're invited into kind of considering, what is happening inside of that reflexive experience. And this seems to give rise, or at least create opportunities for creativity and imagination to interpret that reflexive pause, if we might wish to think of it that way. And I find it interesting that, as we look at AI, as it's emerging, there seem to be kind of two schools of thought, at least two schools of thought about it. One school of thought sort of says, well, the AI proves that awareness and intelligence and creativity are not that special because look, we can press a button and something can write stories or create paintings or images. And then there's another school of thought that says that, and Sir Roger Penrose, who I believe is at Cambridge right now, hold the view that there is that while certain patterns that we might describe as creative may be replicated, that reflexive moment when we have to pause for understanding is not something that we can algorithmically train. The moment when we actually evaluate what does it mean to engage in an act of writing or to respond to that invitation for a creative act, that's not algorithmic. The output has certain patterns, and we can train algorithms to recognize those patterns and replicate them. But it seems to me that as much as we can use the technology as a kind of reflexive tool to invite others and ourselves into the spaces of creativity, then we can maybe perhaps expand that multimodality and going back to your question, maybe come closer to that non-anthropocentric view of nature, because whatever it is in us that's capable of connecting that gap is probably something that also allows us to connect with things that don't speak or write necessarily as in natural entities.
Goran, I love that comment. And while you were speaking, I was thinking about the term sustainability, because you mentioned that we do have to continue kind of evolving in the way that we are interacting with creativity. And I'm wondering if we only have a few minutes left. I recognize that, but I'm wondering if anybody does do research in the area of sustainability and what the relationship could be between sustainability and creativity.
I have questions around the word sustainability. If I am married and I love my wife and I'm in a group and I put my arm around her and I say, honey, we have a sustainable relationship, I'm not sure I'm going to get the Valentine's Day card I want. But if I put my arm around her and I say, look around, our relationship is flourishing. Evolution does not sustain. We talk about sustain as if because we're privileged and we want things to stay the same. Evolution disrupts, creates mutants. And so that is the heart of creativity. Living systems, unlike physics, can find affordances, can go, oh, This cup is designed to hold something, but it's drafty here. I can use it as a paperweight, a purpose it wasn't designed for, but I can apply new purpose to it. And so I think sustainability actually is an anti-creative sort of meme. And I think the better approach is, how do we harness creativity to flourish, to adapt, to evolve, right? And that's as green as you can get, right? All living systems have to metabolize, have to live on something and excrete something. And our challenge is, how do we take those excretions and make sure they're input to something else? Sorry, that's a little bit of a rant around sustainability, but it's almost as if they're like, they're antithetical to each other. And I completely believe in paradox, and we have to hold antithesis together. But I don't think it's a coherent term for the application of creativity. Sorry.
Well, we've only got a minute or two left, so I'm going to turn it back to you, Gillian and Jessica, if you want to kind of wrap things up and bring us all back around.
I just want to mirror that comment quickly. I'm so sorry, Jillian. I loved that idea of, instead of trying to sustain systems that we have in place, or sustain the way that we interpret creativity, I really like that word flourish. I'm going to make myself a few notes. I'm so sorry, Jillian.
Never apologize. The teamwork makes the dream work. All the better that we work together today, Jessica. I was just going to say, there's no way we could bring us all back around, nor would we ever want to. We're wonderful in the different ways we've thought about things today. I'm just pleased, as one of the facilitators, that it was a topic that invited and encouraged such great conversation. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for co-facilitating with me, Jessica. And thank you, Stan, for your ever-present, chill, and well-controlled facilitation.
Oh, well, that brings me to my part. Well, thank you both for such an engaging conversation, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. What a great way to launch us back in full force into our idea jam. So thank you both for that. We want you to know that Scenic is socially connected, so check out our website at www.canadiannetworkforimaginationandcreativity.com, all one word. We can also be found on Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and on YouTube. So find us online for more information and links to register for the Idea Jam. So if you know somebody who wants to, point them in that direction. For bios, view our past Idea Jam sessions, and then for the chats and other helpful information about us and what's coming up. Speaking of what's coming up, so in April, this year, very shortly, Scenic is going to be having our very first ever live experience, because we've been living on Zoom for the last 3 years. So this is our first live experience in-person event called Odyssey of Discovery, and it's going to be happening here in Ottawa, Canada. This promises to be an event to remember, and we are very, very excited, especially as this is getting closer and closer. So stay tuned to all of your usual channels. Check out our channels for more information. But if you need more immediate details, you can email Michael Wilson at mpwilson@uottawa.ca, and he would be more than happy to give you more information about our Odyssey of Discovery. We're very excited, so look out for that. As we close for the evening, we thank you again for joining us this past hour, and we look forward to seeing you again in February. Our topic for the night will be being creative when you feel the least creative, and that's going to be hosted by me, right? And there's a whole thing. I've been avoiding being a host for 2 years now, and it's caught up with me finally. So we're going to see what happens when you feel the least creative. So on behalf of all of us here at Scenic, we do wish you a great night. And oh, Gillian, you got something? Pop right in there.
Very last thing, I'm excited to share in the next week or two a podcast and blog series called Cultivating Leadership, Leading Toward a Just Future. It's about how we're using imagination to support eco and social justice in educational leadership. So I'll share it out on the channels that were already shared, and hopefully you'll tune in and participate. So thank you so much.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for catching my attention. I knew there was something else. So on behalf of all of us here at Scenic, we wish you a great night, a wonderful end to your week, and enjoy the rest of this month. We're glad you made time with us this evening as always, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
Happy New Year. Thank you, everyone.
Happy New Year. Do you keep the chats before?